Welcome class to another unit, and in collaboration with my amazing colleague Dr. Yañez, we put together this lecture that deals with confusing labels. And they're confusing because that's why I'm wearing this hat. Maybe I look like a Cuban, and maybe you think I'm Latino, and maybe Hispanic, or Chicano, or maybe Latinx with the X, or maybe you think that I'm a Chicanx. It doesn't really matter. These labels are so confusing. And Dr. Yañez and myself, we're going to unpack their history and the power behind these racial terms that are tied to our legal system. And Dr. Yañez will provide you with great samples and the implication these labels have had in real time. So enjoy this amazing lecture, and I'm looking forward to your comments at the end.
Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Yañez. I'm really happy for you to be listening in on this lecture. It's a really important one, a really critical one, and we're going to really be unpacking racialized terms of the Mexican. So let's check it out. Before we get into the official lecture, I have a self-reflection written activity for you. So let's look at these questions together. Grab a piece of paper. You can always pause this slide and take your time. But for the sake of this lecture, I'm going to go ahead and read the questions, and then we're going to continue on. But I do advise that you do this before the lecture, because I'm going to ask you to reflect on this at the very end as well. What kind of connotations, images, associations come to your mind when you think of the term Mexican? So even if you're just listening along and you're not pausing and writing, think about the first things that come to your mind. So don't be afraid. This isn't about being politically correct. This isn't about being right or wrong per se, but legitimately think about what things, ideas, stereotypes are associated with the term or the group of people that are known as Mexicans. So first thing that comes to mind, don't think too hard about it, don't be scared, and there's no right or wrong answer, okay? 2, what racial terms do you identify with? So this might seem vague, and you might say, well, what does she mean? Or what's cool? What do I really identify with? So think of any terms that you think are racialized terms. How do you define them or identify with them more so? I'm not going to say too much because I want to see what you come up with on your own. I'm curious for you, and I want you to have that self-reflection. So again, this should not be a long process. What comes to your mind? And what do you refer to yourself as? Some people may identify with a particular quote unquote race label. So maybe there are more than one, but which one do you mainly reference yourself as? And think about it too. It should be pretty fast. What comes to the top of your mind if someone were to ask you or you were to identify yourself in that way? And finally, can you describe the meaning of that word you chose, your racialized term? Why do you use this term, that specific label? What does it mean to you? Or is it just kind of random? We're going to go deeper into that analysis today. And overall, what significance does your racial term have for you? Do you know the meaning? Do you know the history? Do you know where it comes from? So very similar to number 4, but again, why do you use that when there are a variety of race labels that can be used? Okay, enough of the self-reflection, let's get into the lecture. But again, please take a moment to have those thoughts laid out, and we're going to do some comparing at the end. We're going to review at the end of this lecture. So let's get into it. Let's think about history and power in terms of terms, okay? I have a picture here of Dora, the explorer, and she's with her good friend, Backpack. So it might seem like an odd image, but really what I am prompting you to think about and to visualize is how we're going to unpack these terms literally, okay? So racialized terms have context. They're always tied to power and to a legal system. Okay, so just like Dora, we're going to think of each, we're going to explore these terms, okay? We are going to unpack them and think of each of the terms. They have a backpack on them. They have history, they have meaning, they have significance. So let's get into it. Unpacking their meaning, as I just mentioned, we're going to go into some deep context and modern usage. And they also have implications in real life. They're not just random or neutral or coming out of thin air. They have deep historical meaning, okay? So we're going into that significance. So specific usage of terms or race categories. So we're talking about race categories, okay? So a lot of the times these categories or these quote unquote racialized labels, they're defined by the government, and you see them a lot on the United States Census. So if you don't know too much about that, I'll be talking a little bit about that, but I advise you and encourage you to always do your own research and get into it. In one lecture, I can only cover so much, but I'm very happy to be sharing this amount of information with you. So think about who gets to define these terms, these labels, these racialized categories. And a big part of that is the United States Census. So a lot of times these terms are also distinct to a very particular time period. So we got to really look at the historical context. Where does it come from? And in what historical moment does the meaning change, or is it different, or is it added upon throughout time? And they're also going to vary across regions, and racialized labels are also going to change or maybe be popular in different regions or different states in the United States. This could also apply to Mexico or Latin America, but we're going to focus on the United States. So you may live in California and hear the term Chicano a lot, but you may be from the East Coast, or you may have some familiarity with East Coast, and perhaps the term Chicano is not very popular. So again, it's going to be regional, and it's going to depend on that cultural context. And also, the race term and the meaning is going to vary depending on the social situation. So even, for example, if you were to take a survey, even within your home or your family or your friends or whoever you have at hand, and ask them, what kind of terms do you identify with? You might get different terms in one family or in one group or amongst friends of the same race group. Okay, so it may depend, you might hear of something like Latino night at the club, and then the next night it's like hip hop or country. So in some ways that's kind of similar. It's going to depend on the specific social situation, even though a variety of people may attend those particular dances. But I guess my point is to see, it's interesting to hear, oh, the music is quote unquote Latino night, right? And I know growing up that was really popular, or quote unquote Mexican night. So then what are those different terms, Mexican, Latino? And we'll go there. We're gonna get into there in a minute, okay? So also slang, racist terms, and also some terms can be empowering. So again, don't shy away from understanding even the context of racist terms. We live in a society that rushes to be politically correct and then therefore loses a deep understanding of, let's say, racism or racist terminology, because there's a fear of, quote unquote, that's racist to learn about. It's not racist to learn about race. It's not racist to learn about terms or their history or their meaning. It's knowledgeable and it's considered education. So let's go. what are race categories? So this was interesting. When I asked you to think about what associations come up with the term Mexican, you may have come up with a lot, or maybe not many, or maybe you signaled certain stereotypes. However, I'm going to have a list for you here. These are a couple of racial categories that have been used to identify the Mexican population or the group. So there's a lot, but I only have a handful here. So let me bring these up and we'll read them together. So just off the top of my head, I can think of Mexican descent, of Mexican origin, mestizo, indios, hispanos, Spanish, Mexican American, Chicano, Latino, Hispanic, what else? Latin, La Raza, Pocho, Pocha. The list goes on and on. So if you are an enthusiast of learning about Chicano history, Mexican history, Chicanx history, right away you're going to see in the literature that there's so many terms, racialized categories, that attempt to define one group. So hopefully you're not confused, but I'm showing you this because there have been so many terms, race terms, to quote unquote talk about or think about the people we know as Mexicans in the United States. So it's a lot, right? A couple of racist or slang terms. I often do this activity with my students over the years in my classrooms, and I do create a comfortable atmosphere so people are not shy. They are not shy of using some more racist terms, which is fine because it's a descriptor of something that has been long embedded in American society, the colonial discourse of describing Mexicans. Beaner was a popular one, wetback, mojado, foreigner, alien, illegal, immigrants. So a lot of times when racist ideologies came up with the Mexican, it always veered around the so-called idea of immigrant or alien or non-belonging within the American nation. And sometimes people would identify quote unquote more positive connotations. They might say like Mexicans have large families. I'm not sure how that's positive, but that would be a stereotype that people draw upon. They might also say, oh, well, when I think of Mexicans, I think of hard workers. So that can also be problematic in the sense that Mexicans always seen as hard workers. Usually if they're being overworked or exploited in their work, we can think of long-standing relations of Mexican farm workers in the American fields that are being exploited. That's not necessarily a good thing. Their labor is being exploited, right? But the idea that if they just work hard enough, they're gonna make it. Well, we all know that they're paid very low wages. And no matter, they can work most of the day and that's still not going to provide a living wage. So, but the ones on the screen are the most common that people will reference when they think of more negative racialized terms of the Mexicano or the Mexican. And we saw with the current president, Trump, really draw upon these racialized and racist discourses of Mexicans as criminal, as alien, as illegal, and also went as far to say that all Mexicans were rapists. So you're going to see, why does that make sense? Why is he using these type of languages? Because it's nothing new. These are long, historical, century-long discourses of how Mexicans are framed or understood within the United States. So what is the significance of these terms? So when we think about Mexican, at one point, it was associated with a lot of negative connotations historically. To be called a Mexican was seen as dirty or derogatory and very un-American. So sometimes Mexicans would not like that particular term because it was associated with so much negativity. I would argue that this is still within the present time. A lot of people do continue to have negative connotations of who Mexicans are in the United States. So it isn't just at one point in time, but historically, to be called Mexican was seen as a negative thing. To associate with Spanish, Spanish American, Hispanos, this was an attempt for some Mexicans to associate with quote unquote the Spanish heritage. So this would be a form of claiming white identity or embracing whiteness, even if they were not legitimately Spanish or what we consider white in America. So some Chicana and Chicano scholars have called this a Spanish fantasy heritage, where predominantly native people from Mexico would try to assimilate into American culture, assimilate to whiteness, embrace a quote unquote Hispanic identity or heritage with the hopes of assimilating and shedding their native culture, shedding their brownness, and trying to fit in. So sometimes you will hear these terms where people will say, oh, I'm really Spanish, or I'm Spanish American, or I'm Hispano. So that's not always so clear and dry. Unless you legitimately are from Spain, you can claim that particular heritage. But with the confines of colonization, a lot of indigenous people from Mexico, or quote unquote mestizo people, chose or wanted to embrace perhaps their Spanish heritage.